Hello everyone, and sorry for the delay with this video. I made one earlier, but it appears that my microphone didn't work at the time. And even though I'm looking very nice there, I had to do it one more time. Sorry about this. Okay, the last round of the London tournament is already a fact. And as most of the people expected, there weren't too many decisive results. The usual suspect was there though. Veselin Topalov playing with the black pieces against Levon Aronian. Aronian desperately needed to win the game, and he wanted to catch up with the leaders. And I think that if he had won that game, he would be in the contest for the second place, shared second place as far as I know. So he chose the English opening, and Topalov reacted to that one in return with symmetrical setup. It might sound a little bit strange that Aronian is using such a slow opening for such an important game, but the thing is that when you see that your opponent in general is in a very bad shape, it makes sense that you try to keep the pressure as long as you can, so that you can give him a chance to crumble under this pressure. You know, his nerves are not in their usual level. There are a lot of negative emotions at the back of the mind of this player, so it makes sense, and this is perfectly playable strategy. It's probably the best strategy ever. Let me give you one example. If you remember the match between Kasparov and Karpov from the World Championship in Sevilla, Kasparov needed to win the decisive 24th game to level the score, and he chose the closed, semi-closed opening, the ready opening with the white pieces, and he managed to grind down his opponent at the end of the day. So something similar we see here. Rook e1 is quite a rare move in this situation. d5 is one idea. It has been seen recently in a game Grandelius against Li Chao from Stavanger, when after these moves, Black even sacrificed a pawn and he got a very lively and very interesting game. Another move is d takes c5, but this looks very drawish. And b3 is sort of a main line. But the move that Aronian played was quite a normal move, quite an useful move in the future. White can start pushing the pawns, so it makes perfect sense. Also, anytime that black trades, the rook would be working on the e-file. Topalov came up with a novelty on that one. He played also quite a useful move. Logical novelty in situations like that, in the Fianchet alliance, black very often wants to go rook b8 to clear the diagonal of the opponent's bishop, and also to search for counterplay with b5. Aronian in return is trying to stop this, and he made another mystery move with the rook. The idea is that now b5 could be met with a line like dc5, bc5, and he can also take here in the knight e4, attacking the pawn on c5, or he can do immediately knight e4. Here is a curious line on bishop b2, just captures. White can easily sacrifice the exchange as long as this king is deprived of the defender of the dark squares. For instance, bishop c1, there'll be a check, queen takes. Now, anytime a piece lands on this diagonal, that one is not feeling very, very comfortable. And on king f6, there'll be b takes c6, king g7, queen c5. White already has a lot of threats, c7, queen e5 being the main ones to win material, this rook in particular, but also bishop c3, queen e5. And attack on the long diagonal is on the agenda, so this is definitely something that I wouldn't recommend for black. Obviously, Topalov also didn't like something about this line. He played b6, and on knight e2, he saw this chance. He sees the chance, and he played the move e5. There is no longer a knight on c3 threatening to hop on the e5, and e5 is a perfectly sensible move. Next he played h6, and he is ready to start pushing the pawns on the king side. Aronian's reaction to that one is d5. Give me the knight. Now, if this was some usual King's Indian setup, or Old Indian setup, the knight would be on f6, the black knight, and the move d5 wouldn't be that horrible. The knight can simply go to e7. But right now, the knight doesn't really have a lot of a choice. Knight a7 seems like really horrible move to make. Then there'll be a3, b4, and with the knight on a7, black will hardly have any good game in the foreseeable future. But true to his style, Topalov played the move knight b4, and it doesn't really matter if he's in good form or in a bad shape. He is always ready to do something creative, and to follow the logical stream of the game. Here, he sacrificed the knight with the move b5. In return for the knight is obviously trapped. He's taking 3 pawns. 1, 2, give me the bishop, 3. There was definitely a lot of calculation from both sides, and I'm pretty sure that Topalov saw that after queen c1 he has to give up one of the pawns, because if he does a move like queen c7 to defend on c4, there will be tactical strike knight e5, and if knight e3, bishop e3, pawn takes on e5, the pawn on h6 is hanging, and white will be still winning a pawn. The way to give up the pawn, there is a better way than that, and this is the move c3. The pawn is sacrificed, but her brother, the pawn on the b file, is becoming much better and much stronger, already threatening to fork the queen and the rook. Queen b1 was a slight finesse, which I couldn't quite understand, to be honest with you. I thought that queen to b2 is a little bit better. And then Topalov found another very interesting maneuver. First of all, he's threatening bishop f5, and after the queen moves, presumably knight e4 and knight c5, or the other way to bring this knight into the action is via e4 c5 or d7 c5 squares, and then eventually to d3. Knowing this, Aronian goes for a very interesting pawn sacrifice himself by playing the move c4, and I think that this is the best chance that he has in the situation, because if he does rook e3, there will be bishop e6, and all of a sudden, even though Topalov is sacrificing another pawn, he is getting tremendous initiative. There is just one pawn for the piece, but the threat is knight c5, give me the rook followed by knight e3, give me the queen, give me the other rook. And black is not shy even of trading that rook in the future by playing rook a8 followed by rook a2. Once that this pawn gets a lot of support, it will be tremendously difficult for white to stop it. Just have a look who is blocking it. Her Majesty herself. It's not a good blocker, you know it. So c4 is bringing the white pieces into life. And after queen c4, knight c3 followed by rook c1, Aronian already has some threats of his own. The knight might jump somewhere, you never know, discovering the queen. But there is also discovering the rook to attack the queen. But there is also the idea of bishop f1 to attack the queen and to secure the pawn to take it on e6. Topalov is not even worried at all. He goes knight e7 and he continues with his plan of knight c5 and knight e3. Aronian played e4 to cut the queen away from the g4 square, because the immediate bishop f1 could have been met with queen g4, and that's an important tempo gainer, after which there will be a5, knight c5 and maybe e5 in the future. So everything is quite logical at the moment. Black is bringing his knight into the attack, and after this final preparation, black is already almost ready to go for a5 and a4. Not almost, he is completely ready to push the pawn all the way to a4. If this happens, he is going to have 3 huge pawns for a piece, and this is going to be very bad for white. So white needs to do some trades, and he does trade the knight on c5 now. After rook takes c5, he went rook e4, and next he keeps on trading pieces to somehow weaken the pawns. Without the defense of that bishop, those pawns can become easy prey for the white pieces. Okay, so there isn't much of a choice for Topalov. He went queen c6. After bishop d5, he took it. In return for those 2 pieces, though, he got a nasty pin along the c file, and I think that here queen c7 would have been more to the point than the move that he played in the game, queen d7, which, by the way, is creating the threat of rook c3 and queen e4. White replied rook e3, and he starts harvesting the pawns now. He took on e4, he had to give up the pawn on d5, and then he took on b3. Somewhere around this stage of the game, Topalov was in time trouble, but his moves are quite obvious, and that time trouble ended after the move rook d to b5, rook c1, and d5. This is move number 40. It's time to assess what happened. Well, white did what he wanted. He took the pawns on the queen side, but by doing so, he sent all his pieces there on the queen side. So There isn't much to be afraid there anymore, but on the other side, his king is felt quite lonely. Plus, black has a lot of active pieces. True, he has only 2 pawns for the 2 knights, but look at those pawns. They are huge. They are ready to go forward. They are ready to open up the king, or they are ready to become queens. The bishop is clearly a better piece than the knight in situations like that, as the game is quite open and it's easier for the bishop to go from one side to another. Plus, we shouldn't forget about this king. After h5, h4, and h3, it might get into trouble itself. Or even after h5, h4, and the threat on g3, it can get quite weak. So, all in all, for the pawn, black has plenty of initiative, and my feeling is that it is white who has to be careful to keep the balance. For the time being, Aronian is doing this perfectly fine. He jumped knight c5. This knight cannot stay there forever, obviously. And on d4, he played rook a7, further activating his pieces. Maybe rook a8 was also an idea. Then the pawn came to d3. This rook came on c7. And Topalov is logically just advancing his pawns, as we were talking about on the king side. So both the players played extremely well. And since black's position seems so dangerous, Aronian decided to force a draw and to give up the piece. I think that this is the right decision for him to do. On queen a4, h4, he took on e4. After queen e4, knight e4, and rook b3, he was just a couple of moves away from the draw, but something went wrong with his calculation, and instead of the obvious move rook d7, which was gaining that really important and dangerous pawn, he chose a different one. We'll be back to that one in a moment, but first let's check this line. After h3, this king is in trouble, in kind of a trouble, and rook d1, for instance, is not immediately winning the pawn because of the back rank checkmate. But the thing is that white doesn't need to hurry with this one. He doesn't need to take the pawn at once. Yes, it wants to go to g2, but if he does the move knight to c5, he should be okay. Next move, he's going to take it after this rook makes a move. And even though it is still a little bit unpleasant for white, as his king can be easily cut on the second rank, it should be bearable and should be a draw at the end of the day. Instead of doing this, the Armenian GM took on h4, obviously getting rid of this nail on the king's side, this pawn. But the problem here is that after bishop h6, he cannot easily take the pawn. In fact, he cannot take the pawn at all. If, for example, he goes for rook c8 now, with a tempo to attack the pawn from behind, black can do something similar. He will do rook b1 check, followed by d2, and the capture on d2 with the knight is going to lead to a nasty pin. The knight is lost, as well as the game. And if in this line white sacrifices the exchange with rook d2, hoping for some fortress, I believe that there shouldn't be a fortress. The typical winning method in situations like that is to bring the king all the way to e2, and then either to put the opponent into Zugzwang, or to sacrifice the exchange back, let's say for a pawn, ideally, and that pawn will be an extra one. You can check it for yourselves, but I have the strong feeling that this should be a win for the second player. Also, we shouldn't forget that this king can go first for the h-pawn, and only after that he can think about something else. Then, how to defend? Aronian, the move rook d1 was an option, but here it doesn't work because after rook b1 and captures, the pawn is too fast and it's getting promoted. Okay, we're winning the knight. Black is winning the knight in this line. So Aronian tried a trap. He played the move rook f1. The idea is that the obvious move rook b1 now fails to the capture, to the move rook d7, and after the captures and the check and d2, the difference is that now the pawn can be captured, and in case of rook d2, since the king is on g8, white has a small counter trick to regain the piece and to regain the rook and to save the game. But Topalov doesn't need to do that. He played the move rook 3 to b4, give me the knight, give me the pawn, and it became very obvious that black is completely winning. He has the more active rooks, he has the superb light piece, he has the huge passer on the d file, which is going to cost white at least the knight. Aronian played f3, In case of knight g5, he would have lost after rook h4, and now bishop f4 gave me the rook, gave me the pawn, but most importantly gave me the knight after the spin. And now black is completely winning. f3 did not help neither, because after rook b2, this maneuver did not help. The pawn is going to d2, the threat is rook b1. On rook d7, the other rook came to e1, and that was basically it. That was the first and only win for Topalov at this tournament, with which he doubled his points. And although this didn't prevent him from taking the last place, this must have been a good thing for him. Aronian couldn't make it to the top places. The winner of the tournament is Veselin. Congratulations to him. Great tournament, great play. And that will be everything from London. Thanks for watching this, and see you next time.